Hey everyone, Pugs here with two new reviews for y'all. Today, I'm covering Squidward's School for Grown-Ups and Oral Report. Well, isn't this rather topical, with it being back to school season here in the US, and I'm assuming perhaps the Northern Hemisphere at large. These are also two episodes that don't have a great reputation, though that applies to one of these episodes more than the other. So that's another exciting little point of connection, wouldn't you say? I would, because I love tackling episodes with bad reputations. Even if I dislike them myself, there's still a thrill in doing so. As always, thank you all for watching today. It's always after I take little breaks like I have been for the past month that I really feel that appreciation strongly. Because even though my schedule can be erratic, y'all are still here and watching, and that just makes me really happy. So seriously, thanks y'all. And now, let's just get right into it. So, I already said that Squidward's School for Grown-Ups is an episode with a less than stellar reputation, and I stand by that. But what I've yet to say is that I also consider this episode to be one of the most forgettable episodes in this entire show. At least for me personally. Because no matter what I do, or how recently I have watched this episode, I can never remember anything in this plot beyond Patrick growing a beard. Seriously. Even right now, as I write this script, it's been a couple years since I watched this episode for the purpose of reviewing it for the forum, and so until I revisited it for this review, I'd literally forgotten all the details beyond Patrick growing a beard again. And it's a shame that I'm so forgetful about this episode because that means that I forget such an important detail. That it begins with a gorgeous background. This has been something a lot of episodes this season have been doing, and I wholeheartedly welcome that as the background art aficionado that I am. Moving on, this beginning portion of the episode also includes some key information, i.e. SpongeBob and Patrick greeting each other and laying it on thick that they're friends before playing a game, that signals to us as the audience that this is going to be one of those episodes about SpongeBob and Patrick's friendship. Oh boy. This will probably be either very good or very bad. This show's track record when it comes to episodes about the best friends has been steadily growing worse, which is something that I talked about during my season overview of season 7, so check that out if you want a more detailed discussion of that trend. But the long and short of what I said there is that relatively newer episodes with the best friend duo try to introduce a conflict between them that just doesn't work for various reasons, and it appears that this episode might be going down that route. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about what's actually happening right now, such as SpongeBob and Patrick's chosen activity of screaming at boats as they pass by. This activity is both annoying and boring to watch, which is very nearly impressive. One thing that is interesting about Squidward's School for Grown-Ups is that it directly, in no uncertain terms, highlights that child-adult line that this show likes to straddle. As a reminder, I'm referring to how this show balances childlike and adult-like content both in-universe, as in within its characters, such as making SpongeBob an adult with a full-time job and house, but still having him be in the high school proxy that is boating school, and out of universe, like as in its comedy and how it makes use of humor that kids understand and enjoy, and humor that adults understand and enjoy. Not to mention that most of the humor for kids, adults also might find funny. I talk about this line like all the time, but I think it's been a while since I laid out exactly what it was, so I thought it would be nice to just like take a second and do that here. But anyway, yeah, back to what I was talking about. So this episode highlights this child-adult line, which I find to be pretty interesting since the show doesn't actually, or usually, call attention to it in this way. Or at least the idea of this episode doing this is interesting. The execution, however, well, let's just say it leaves much to be desired. And let's talk about why that is. Well, for one thing, this plot is nonsensical and not in a good way. Squidward berates the best friends for their childish activity and rhetorically asks when they're going to grow up, which they assume is a game. Patrick then falls asleep out of nowhere, which is fine because, well, it's fine. I don't have a problem with that necessarily, it's just kind of boring. We get a moment that reminds me of an actually good episode focusing on SpongeBob and Patrick's friendship, Patrick Smartpants, and then then SpongeBob wakes Patrick up, and when Patrick wakes up, he suddenly has a beard. Okay then. This episode almost feels like it's stealing from the first movie by making sudden facial hair the marker of adulthood. That's a joke, to be clear. However, what is less of a joke is my belief that this episode seems to be taking all the wrong pages from the book of Patrick Smartpants. Like I said a moment ago, where that episode is an endearing look at the pair's friendship that feels astute and important, this episode is a boring and annoying mess. Squidward's involvement in this one makes it feel like an unholy combination of the first movie, nautical or naughty nautical neighbors, and Patrick Smartpants, as he just creates this wedge between SpongeBob and Patrick by inducting Patrick into what I'd like to call the Squidward School of how to be a miserable asshole in your adult years. And as I say that, now I realize that this episode makes me think of You Don't Know Sponge with Squidward's ineffective involvement. Great. There's just a complete lack of charm in how this is all done, and I think that if there had been some charm and perhaps some finesse, I would have liked this episode. Like, I feel like some elements of not normal could have helped here. Another reason that I don't like Squidward School for Grown-Ups is that literally every single main character in this episode is bad. Squidward feels like he's missing some element to make me like him more, but compared to everyone else, he's the most like himself. Patrick is just a prick for no reason, which becomes even worse when we learn that the beard wasn't even real. God, I am so tired of Patrick being an asshole. Reminder that in Patrick Smartpants, Patrick was never an asshole, or at least not malicious to SpongeBob. He was simply a changed man. It's like this episode tried to do that, but completely failed to grasp that Patrick had real motivation for his change. Here, Patrick, I assume, is trying to impress Squidward. We don't know why he has any personal investment in wanting to be grown up. I know part of the reason Patrick is a jerk here is because Squidward is teaching him to look down on those who aren't quote-unquote grown-ups, so I probably shouldn't be so harsh, but, well, I'm not having a good time, so I feel like I get to be harsh about this. Alright, that was a longer rant about Patrick than I anticipated. Moving on to SpongeBob, even he suffers here. He's written very annoyingly in some parts of this episode, which in my opinion demonstrates a fundamental misrepresentation of his character, because Patrick is supposed to be the mature one here, or at least this is my assumption, because need I remind you yet again that Patrick Smartpants didn't do this. SpongeBob is written to act like how Patrick would in a regular episode. In other words, much more childish and even babyish. I think that SpongeBob should have been the one to grow the beard in this episode and trying to act like a grown-up. The only issue would be that this episode could possibly run into some plagiarism accusations on behalf of Not Normal and even the first movie, but I think that this plot could have differentiated itself easily. Now, that's not to say that this change would fix this whole episode, since then it would have run the risk of being like Porous Pockets, not to mention Squidward's character still being problematic, but I think it would have been an improvement. Let me state for the record that there are two good things in this episode. The first is the bit at the art museum. It's nice to see that there was a clear capability for this episode to be funny and just chose not to be. Okay, that was a bit backhanded, but it is true that this scene was funny. And notice how this funny part involved SpongeBob and not anything that Squidward and Patrick were doing, just saying. And then the second thing was the opera, specifically SpongeBob singing. Teresa Parente has a beautiful voice. I would never go to the opera in real life, but I do enjoy good singing. And while this moment did not evoke the emotions I think it wanted to out of me, I did like it. So those were two things about this episode that were good. Bringing it all together now, Squidward School for Grown-Ups could have been about the importance of preserving one's inner child, much like Idiot Box or Grandma's Kisses. It could have been about the importance of friends that support you and love you for who you are rather than who they want you to be. But it was about neither, and instead it felt like an episode without a clear focus because it spent so much time on unnecessary and annoying things and not enough time building up the actual story. So it's just an unpleasant watch for me. The ending feels unearned and rushed, and it's just not great. This episode just barely misses the mark of being part of my mediocre tier because Squidward makes me want to strangle him, because he was so infuriating, and there is nowhere else for this episode to go but my barely tolerable tier, where it comes in with a score of 4.9 out of 10. You know, when I was talking about how we were long overdue for a boating school episode while reviewing the Hot Shot, Oral Report is not what I had in mind. I won't say that this episode is infamous, but it certainly doesn't have a good reputation. In the past, I've rated this episode pretty lowly, but it's also true that there was never a time that I had any strong feelings towards this episode. I'd even say that my strongest feelings were that the doodles on the title card were adorable. Of course, for this review, I've rewatched this episode, which has helped my feelings to become more discernible. So, the beginning of this episode is not really a great omen as it is very boring. The stare down between Squidward and the customers does not engage me in any way whatsoever, and the plot reveal that SpongeBob is preparing for an oral report at boating school doesn't really give me a good feeling for what's to come either. And the reason I say that is because, let's be real, the only thing that matters in boating school is the test. That is the only thing that has any consequence for SpongeBob getting his license. We've only ever cared about the test, other than that brief essay excursion and procrastination. Boating school has almost always been about the driving test, which means that I kind of automatically don't care about this report because we know immediately that this won't get SpongeBob any closer or further from his license. Yes, we know that SpongeBob will never get his license, but there's something more fun in watching the shenanigans of the test than something that is supposed to make the grade school allegory that is boating school even more clear. Another issue I have with this premise right off the bat is that SpongeBob having a fear of public speaking doesn't really fit to me. Like, yeah, because of his general anxiety around driving, which is why he always fails his test, which was hinted at in the hot shot and will be further explored in Bumper the Bumper, you could say that this is maybe in character for him, but like we've seen time and time again, like we've seen also time and time again that SpongeBob is the kind of guy who can talk to literally anyone, and he has been in the spotlight multiple times and been just fine. I know it's one of those things where it changes based on plot. I mean, like, he was nervous in squirrel jokes, for example, but character traits are just one of those things where I'd prefer they stay as consistent as possible. I know that's a big ask for a show like SpongeBob SquarePants, but I'm allowed to have my requests. And if the episode had just showed SpongeBob having a very specific kind of performance anxiety, like with his driving, I'd have no problem here. But as we can see by him cowering in front of the Krusty Krab customers, it's not a perfectionist drive to do well that fuels his anxiety, which is what makes it inconsistent with what we've seen from him before. And so I feel like this episode sacrifices coherency for relatability, and I'm not really a fan of that. We then, of course, get a random Patrick inclusion in this episode, which makes enough sense since Patrick is SpongeBob's best friend, and so SpongeBob would, of course, go to him for support. However, Patrick's appearance here leads into the part of the episode that I'd say I dislike the most, which is SpongeBob's practice speech with Patrick as his audience. I'm sure you can guess why I don't like this scene. Patrick is fucking annoying. I fear this could be a trend for this season already. This scene is also boring as shit, which means that much like this episode's sister, this scene contains an almost paradoxical combination of annoying and boring, which is an awful combination. The various things that Patrick forces SpongeBob to do are just completely nonsensical and not entertaining for me either, and the only credit I can really give this part of the episode is that, in his own twisted way, Patrick is at least trying to help. At least I choose to think he is, and this is good because that means he's not being malicious, which is when I really get pissed off. As if I wasn't already annoyed enough by this episode, Oral Report decided it truly wanted me irritated because it does that fucking infuriating thing where they disrespect Sandy for no reason. Why, exactly, does Patrick not know who Sandy is? Why does he not know who Sandy is when they were on a first-name basis 2 episodes ago? I can get resetting character dynamics between characters in this show, though at this point, given that this is season 8, I think this should stop. But they should not be doing this for 2 of the main characters. It's especially insulting that it's Sandy always at the end of this joke, because we barely see her anyway, due to this show's barely disguised misogyny problem. And yes, I'm saying that with my chest. There is truly no reason that Sandy should have as few appearances as she does when she's one of the primary 5 characters in the main lineup of 10, but that's a conversation I will put off yet again because I would really need to do a whole video for a discussion like that. Anyway, I guess this episode confirms that Sandy does indeed walk around in her underwear, so good for her. Finally, we get to the actual report promised by the episode's title, thank God. This report goes just about as well as you'd expect, which I hope you all were expecting a train wreck because that's what it is. Yeah, this part of the episode is simply unpleasant and goes on for so long. And no, I have no idea why Patrick is here either. I don't understand what's supposed to be funny about uncomfortable things. I guess that's just not my kind of humor. Not to mention that this entire scene is my beloathed second-hand embarrassment. I haven't talked about this in a while, so new viewers, listen closely. I hate second-hand embarrassment so fucking bad. I hate it. So you can imagine my pain watching SpongeBob in this scene. Thankfully, we get a reprieve as the episode shifts into chaos mode, which thank God because this is far more interesting than anything else that we've sat through so far. More entertaining too, though that's not saying much. I did think it was kind of funny how SpongeBob ended up giving his whole oral report to the cops while they stared blankly. This show is very good at blank stares that I've noticed. And of course, Mrs. Puff ends up going to jail at the end of the episode, which I feel apathetic about. I know it's a point of contention for some, but to me, it's just a running gag for her character, nothing more, nothing less. Yeah, so Oral Report was not that good. Like its sister, it was boring and annoying, and Patrick specifically got on my nerves. I did not have a very good time watching this one until the last 2 minutes, which makes this whole enterprise so disappointing because the potential was there, but it was squandered. The tier that I'll be placing this episode in, then, is my mediocre tier, where it comes in with a score of 5.3 out of 10. Perhaps that might be higher than you expected given everything I've said, but the episode hits more of those boring points than the annoying ones. It's just more natural to talk about the annoying stuff. As always, I'll be ending this video with some closing thoughts of mine. Man, I think that little break I incidentally took was good for me because I felt pretty energized when writing the scripts to these 2 episodes, and I definitely added lots more from my original reviews on SpongeBob Mania. I like when that happens. I also think it's funny that these 2 episodes turned out to be rather similar in many ways. Pretty fitting for a sister episode pair, right? I wish the similarities weren't all bad, but beggars can't be choosers. I just really wish that they'd stop writing Patrick this way. Like, watching episodes like these, you can see where Patrick got his piss poor reputation from. And Patrick has never been my favorite character, but I never liked that he had such a bad rep. But it's certainly understandable. I just don't get the point in writing him like this. It's like they're trying to be funny by making him an asshole, but Patrick doesn't have the wit to back that kind of thing up. And I think that's just about everything I can think of to talk about today, so I'm gonna go ahead and close things out here, and I'll see y'all in the next review.